Have you ever changed your mind about something? Like when I was a kid, I used to think tomatoes were super gross, and now they are one of my most favorite foods. Or I watched this YouTube video one time where when you tie a shoe, you actually go around twice before slipping the knot in, which makes your shoe like virtually untieable. I used to think that I couldn't run a 5K, but now I've run hundreds of 5Ks. Have you ever changed your mind about something? What about when it comes to God? Well, here in the book of Romans, we're going to see how our minds can be changed. Have you ever changed your mind about God or God's work in the world? Well, that is what the book of Romans is really all about. That's what we're going to study here over the next 5 weeks. Now, Romans, it's the culminating work of the Apostle Paul. And you can see how God's worked through all the different parts of his life through this book of Romans. You can see how God moved Paul from being shamed to being unashamed, from feeling guilty all the time to experiencing God's grace. He moved Paul from feeling like an imposter to feeling empowered. I am so excited to be able to dive into this here with you for the next 5 weeks because this is the same promise that God has in store for you and for me while we dig into this book in the next couple of weeks. Are you ready to change your mind? Well, here's the backstory of the book of Romans. Romans, like I said, is written by the Apostle Paul. And Paul, he started out his life on a much different path. You see, Paul, he started out as this guy known as Saul, and he was a Pharisee, a Jewish rabbi, a very strict, conservative, traditional Jewish rabbi. And when Jesus had come into the world and done the ministry that Jesus did, and when Jesus died and then rose from the dead, Saul, he did not like these people that were following this Jesus guy. He didn't like him so fast, and the scripture says that he was zealous about going after them. So Saul, he hunted Christians. He went and made sure that they were arrested and tried because he thought that everything that they stood for was against all the traditions that he stood for. Until all of a sudden, Saul has this great big experience with Jesus, with the risen Christ on the road to Damascus. And all of a sudden, Saul, he has this thing and he changes his mind about Jesus. He changes his mind about God's work in the world. And then Saul, his name then becomes Paul. He begins being called Paul, and he becomes the apostle to the Gentiles. Those are people who are outside of the Jewish faith. But because of this Jesus encounter, Paul, he shifts his mind. He goes from this persecuting guy to this guy who's proclaiming and promising Jesus to all nations. This letter, the book of Romans, was written for the believers in Rome, for the early church in Rome. That's why it's named Romans. And it was written around 56, 57 AD, which is only, if you think about it, only about 30 years after Jesus walked on the earth. So if you think about the amount that this Christian movement, that this Jesus movement spread around the world, it was astounding. And Paul wrote this letter when he was already about 20 years into his ministry. So it was really at the height of his career. And Paul, when he writes this letter, he's getting ready to do some new things. In these 20 years, he's been starting churches all over Asia and all over Turkey and Greece. And now he's ready to spread that message even farther. He plans to continue his work in Rome and then travel to Spain to be able to share the message of Jesus there. So he's telling these early followers in Rome, he's trying to instruct them on a couple of things so that he can go and do this further missionary work. One of the things that he's trying to do is he's trying to get them to give a donation. He wants the new Gentile Christians to help support the Jewish Christians so that there's some unity between the two groups. Before there had been kind of some rifts between the two, and he's trying to unite all these different kinds of Christians. He's trying to show them the good news of Jesus. Second thing that Paul teaches us here is that he wants to go do some further missionary work. So he talks about his plans to go travel to Spain to tell us all the things that God is calling him to do in that area of the world. And then the third thing is that Paul focuses in on Jesus, focuses in on the power of God's salvation for all people who believe in all creation. Paul, he talks about how nothing will ever separate any of us from the love of God in Jesus Christ. This is a huge book for us. You see, when I was growing up, I used to think that the way to follow Jesus was to be enough, was to be good enough or strong enough or to pray enough or to read my Bible enough or just to worship enough. I needed to keep on the straight and narrow. And so for too many years in my life, just like Paul, I felt like I had to keep up with all the rules. And I'll be honest, I never measured up. So I spent so much time feeling guilty. Or if I did measure up, I found myself actually judging people who were screwing up, judging people for sinning and for not measuring up. And the truth is that I judged myself even harsher. I'd flog myself for making mistakes. I could beat myself up better than anyone else. I feel so guilty that I would wake up in the middle of the night after I made a mistake and I would stew it over for hours and hours. Here's the thing. I know I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one whose guilt has then turned to shame, where you start to feel like you are a mistake, that you're not enough for yourself, that you're not enough for other people. You're certainly not enough for God. I know that if I felt this, that many, many of you have felt this too. And this was true for me until, like Paul, God changed something for me. God shifted my way of thinking. God revealed something new in my life and showed me a new perspective and a different way of thinking, a way of seeing things. And this is what God has to offer you in these next couple of weeks as we study this book of Romans. I'm so excited for our journey. Here's my questions for you to ponder here today as you get ready to dive into this book. Number one, I want you to think about a time when you changed your mind about something, whether that was something simple like tomatoes or tying your shoe, or something big when it comes to your perspective on God. And number two, I want you to think about shame for a second. What are the things that cause you to feel guilt or shame in your life? And how does God sort of work through those for you? Let's see things differently this season, and let's learn to stand proud, just like Paul, and to live unashamed. Thanks so much for joining us for this Romans study. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook or local TV, I want you to consider signing up for our text messages that accompany this entire study. Every Monday through Friday, we send out a text message that gives you a link to this video with the ability so that you could just pull it up anytime during that day to check it out. All you have to do is text Romans to the number 320-335-8605. And you'll get it every day.